Or are you going to tell me
well,
now
I was
that
going
this
to say,
is...
you know, there are years, you know, there are years in my life that I certainly didn't have my act together. I had my wild years.
Well, no, I wasn't saying that, but
yeah.
you and Tim have been together ever since I've known you.
Right, since '85. So
Well, that's a pretty long, healthy
yeah.
marriage by
No,
today's standards.
It is. It's a great marriage, and I suppose Frank is not Tim by any means.
No.
Frank is rather introverted. He's wrapped kind of tight. Irene is, on the other hand, much more outgoing or whatever. Tim is outgoing as well, but I think that kind of marriage where there's that mutual respect that they have for one another definitely, probably, if I'm honest, reflects something in how I feel about our marriage. That it's possible to have a marriage where two people have very full lives of their own and yet find being with one another essential and important to them. So.
Well, it's clear that in this series you're writing partly from your, what we like to call informed imagination, right? But you're also writing in part from what you know, and I've always thought, just my own view as an outsider here, without carrying it too far, but I've always thought that the married part, the Irene and Frank part, was you. And that you probably looked up, you know, most of the other stuff. Because, I mean, obviously you've done a great deal of research on some of your plots and your backstories, but I think there's a level of sincerity in it. You've also, you and I have talked about another advantage to this relationship, which is it doesn't always mean that when a couple gets married, it kills all the sex, romance, and tension in the series. You've found a different experience, haven't you?
Right. In fact, one of the first mystery conventions that I went to, I heard another author say that she would never have her character get married because marriage was boring. And I thought, it's not the way I think of mine. And while Tim and I don't argue as much as, or really nowhere near as much as Frank and Irene do, they come out of two very different work worlds. His work as a police officer, her work as a newspaper reporter brings him into conflict. There are times when one knows something the other would love to know, and they have to respect they're not being told. There are times when they tell one another things that then can't go back to the workplace. They've had to set out their own rules for how they're going to deal with things within their household with these very, at times, sometimes, you know, the careers are complementary to one another, but for the most part, they're in opposition. And so that brings some drama and conflict into it. They definitely still have, maybe it's that they're still only in their second year or so of marriage, but
that's right, I forgot
they definitely still have very strong level of attraction to one another. So, you know,
well, sex can be the melting pot, this is true. But no, what I was really thinking is that it gives you a chance as a writer to explore the ethics of both their professions, the ethics of journalism and the dynamics of journalism, and the ethics of being a cop. And because what winds up a lot of the time being the situation with Irene and Frank is their colleagues are apprehensive or angry that the two of them are sharing. I mean, if Irene can do a story, there's a suspicion down at the cop shop that Frank has leaked information, or if Irene doesn't go after a story, then there's pressure in the you know, newsroom that she's backing off because she doesn't want to embarrass Frank. So their career dynamics and the ethics that drive both those careers really, as you say, are in serious opposition.
And that's, you know, nothing but good drama for the story ultimately. So, but I do think that that's something that has just sort of grown naturally out of the story of having the two of them together. I definitely did not sit down and say, well, now this is a chance to do this. It's just an outgrowth of the situations I find them in and who they are. They're both people who do care, do try hard to live ethically, try to do the right thing. Irene has been in trouble at work for not revealing things that her, as you say, her editor knows she knows something, and she's saying, look, I found this out this way, I can't bring it in here. He's been in trouble at work, as you mentioned, you know, where people have been sure that he was the one giving the story out, or that he can't be trusted with information because somehow it's going to get through to the press. So
how'd you get into all this? What sort of background do you have as a professional writer?
Well, I was a history major, and I think there's a relationship between history and mystery beyond that you're looking into the lives of dead people and trying to figure out what happened to them. History is about figuring out why people behave in the way they do, what leads one from one place to another, what influenced this. You look at a lot of evidence and try to sort out what was significant, what really caused something to happen. And I think that's pretty much the work of a detective. If you stop and look at it, it's very similar to the work of a detective for a historian. I worked at a manufacturing plant. I worked in corporate America. I tell people that's, you know, how I learned why people want to kill one another. But I was finding it difficult to put my shoes on in the morning because that was the last thing I had to do before going into work. And I decided at that point that it was time to do something that I'd always dreamed of doing and thought of doing, and that was to write. I loved the genre. I loved mystery. I had read a lot of it, and I wanted to, the old adage, I wanted to write a book that I would want to read. And I think that's still good advice for anyone who's writing. Don't write to the market. Don't write trying to anticipate where things are going. You're already behind the 8-ball at that point. Tim came up with the best analogy for this the other day. He said it would be like trying to write the next Macarena. You know, that's already passé by the time you've, you know, been at the keyboard. So that, for me, was really what I was trying to do. I was reading a lot of mysteries with women protagonists who were strong protagonists, and I really liked the books I was reading, still do admire the writers that I was reading then, but I kept running across these women who were real loners, weren't attached to anyone in any way, and I wanted to write a character who did have entanglements and attachments, and in fact that is how things proceed for her, how she usually gets involved. With writing about Frank this time, you know, going into this book alone, it was really a chance to see that in some ways he's very much the same. He is capable of acting alone or being isolated. He can survive isolation, but he ultimately is much happier being a part of a process that involves a team or other people as well.
So what was the inspiration for the first line in your first book? That's where I was steering you. Oh,
okay. Well, the first line in the first book. Well, I was out in a smoky dive in LA with my husband. He's, as I said, a musician, and when you date a musician, at this point we were married, but if you're involved with a musician, you do this thing of watching your friends' bands play. So there's a group that's sort of out in the crowd, and there's some up on the stage, and they rotate around. Some are the drinkers, some are the performers. Sometimes you can't tell the difference. And this particular night, there's a group of very heavy-set women got up. I was much thinner myself then, but these women, I don't think any of them weighed less than about 250, 300 pounds. Big women. And they got up and started dancing. The music playing was Afrobeat, very, very danceable stuff. And they just paid no attention to anybody or who was watching. At this period of time was when people were meeting one another in gyms. Those were the singles bars of the late 80s. And I just admired them for getting up and enjoying themselves and not worrying about what anyone was thinking. And this first line came to me, which was, he loved to watch fat women dance. And I turned to Tim and I said, if I don't make use of that first line, I'm going to stop walking around saying that I'm going to write a book someday. And I just had this thing, I really just viewed it as a gift, just given to me out of the blue, it seemed. So I went home and I wrote a first chapter, and decided I wasn't Chandler, I wasn't Hammett, I wasn't Allingham, Sayers, or any of my other writing heroes. It's an odd thing. A friend of mine once said that writers are the only people who expect their first painting to hang in the Louvre. And it's really the case.